Hello guys and welcome back. It's been a little hiatus away from my reading, but I'm back now. I've just been busy. Life, family, work, everything else. And when I do get my reading done, it's usually late at night when I've got some peace and quiet. But lately I've just been having to hit the sack, hit the hay, go to sleep, and it all starts again, a new day. So without further ado, Ireland, land of the Pharaohs. We're on the ritual. The message for the future is the message of the past. Having finally returned to the pagan land of M1 from our adventures and successfully put together the cryptic picture puzzle which permits us to traverse the threshold of the hidden portal to witness the ancient ritual drama, we are invited to enter and solemnly take our place to watch as the early morning mist swirls on the surface of the river like ancient phantoms of a long-lost race, vying for the best view of this awesome event. The air is still, charged with anticipation. Everything has been meticulously arranged for the major players to presently assume their stations. Events gather apace as William emerges from the medieval courtyard of Mellifont Abbey on the northeast side of the Boyne River at precisely the same instant as James completes his preparations in the environs of Donore Church. If we exercise our imaginations, we will see in the distance, arising out of the early morning haze and standing in glorious splendour, the magnificent monuments of Boyne, whose original names are lost in the mists of time, now only known by the contemporary names of Noth, Douth and Newgrange. The rustle of an embryonic wind, stirring in the branches, snorting horses, digging hoofs into the soft earth and the river rushing past, seeking the safety of the sea, seemingly knowing something momentous was about to happen, are the only sounds to disturb the pre-dawn stillness at Boyne, as we eagerly await the ritual to begin. The Williamite diarist story observed, the day was very clear, as if the sun itself had a mind to see what would happen. At exactly 4 AM, as the sun peers over the southeastern horizon, the overture begins. Williamite drums and bugles shatter the pre-dawn calmness by sounding the generale. Startled, we feel an involuntary rush of blood at the sudden cacophony of martial music, and the hairs on our necks prickle. Looking on from our vantage point, we realise the signals an impressive group of officers, colourfully dressed and led by Prince William, to advance to their positions on the banks of the Boyne. We observe the equally colourful party of James and his officers slowly emerge over the brow of Donore Hill. So begins the awe-inspiring ritual that was to have momentous consequences across the then known world. It stamped its influence firmly on the landscape of our ancestral homeland, leaving a treasure trail of clues that would lead someone someday to the secret history of Ireland, the womb of Western civilization. Nowadays, although still celebrated, the meaning and majesty of this great occult ritual has been, until now, long lost, and with it the memories of a noble and civilizing race. Paradoxically, this mystical land and ritual both conceals and reveals by mythological processes the memory of this once great race for those with eyes to see. Just as importantly, the great body of highly developed knowledge that this race possess has been preserved and protected by the authentic mystery schools. What the mundane world has been left with is a confused deception, a manipulative illusion that is the cause of the conflicts we experience today. We mimic dogs fighting over an historic bone. Those who will gain most from the participation in the upcoming ritual are individuals who will exercise their imagination when translating the mythology of history and perhaps find clues that have been missed in the present tome. The other group of people who will benefit are those who can purge their minds of the traditional story that this ritual was a religious battle and therefore merely a footnote in history. The outcome supposedly leading to Protestant ascendancy. A sectarian battle that led to the repression of the Catholic Irish by planter Protestants has been a useful myth for the power brokers who turned it into a devastating weapon to divide and turn the Scots-Irish clans against each other for the purpose of control. They knew, for reasons set out in this volume, that this race had to be controlled or destroyed before their true ancestry was discovered. In the meantime, substantial resources are employed to prevent us from honestly questioning their view of history, which would reveal their hidden strategy. The past is what makes the present coherent, wrote Afro-American writer James Baldwin, and the past will remain horrible for exactly as long as we refuse to assess it honestly. As a prelude, and to gain a deeper understanding of what will be seen during the ritual battle, we must return one last time to the early pharaonic kingdoms of ancient Egypt. Here we discover the relationship between what is about to ensue at the bend of the Boyne in the Valley of the Kings and ancient Egyptian myth. The earliest Egyptian myths of which we are aware were recorded in hieroglyphic writing. This picture writing existed before the time of Manes. The literature of this old kingdom seems to have burst forth suddenly, as one historian has said. The sudden emergence occurred in the 5th dynasty, 2750 to 26,025 BCE. It existed in what we call the pyramid text. The story which the pyramid text conveys came to be known as the Osirian cycle. These hieroglyphic writings were inscribed on walls of the pyramid tombs and upon papyri. Ancient text uncovered in 1880 by workmen employed by the French Egyptologist Auguste Edouard Mariette when they penetrated the pyramid of Pepi I, reveals the story of Osiris, Isis and Horus. When these myths were collected together, they were developed by the Osirian mystery schools to dramatise the mystical events of Osiris' death and resurrection as a passion play or ritual. It was to provide as well a rite of initiation during which certain knowledge was to be imparted to the candidate. Ikheronfret, an officer of the Pharaoh Sesostris III, 1887 to 1849 BC, related some details of one of these mystery dramas based upon the Osirian cycle. His account was inscribed on a memorial stone which is now preserved in Berlin. Ikheronfret's account of the mystery dramas, which he says was divided into 8 acts, each one having a different title, have some ideas we should note because of their relationship to our story. He describes the 2nd act. Osiris himself appears in his sacred bark. Then the players who were taking part in the ceremony divided. Some were enemies and were supposed to attack the bark, and the others to defend it. The 7th act is said to have been the most imposing spectacle. On the shores or waters of Nedate near Abydos, the mock enemies of Osiris, including the ones portraying the role of Seth and his companions, were overthrown in battle by Horus, son of Osiris. The mock battle, sham fight, became at times very realistic, with many of the actors incurring actual wounds. Though the masses could witness some of these mystery dramas, the actual interpretation was left to the exclusive and secret initiations. Only the most virtuous and those otherwise qualified were honoured as recipients of the knowledge that was imparted on such occasions. Here then is a major clue we can apply to better understand the approaching ritual, because in this text we discover evidence that a ritual battle could be fought with only a few of the leading players being privy to what was actually happening. Do not be lulled into thinking this concealment does not happen in modern context. In an earlier chapter we saw Albert Pike set out in his opus Morals and Dogma how knowledge is withheld from the neophyte. He compounds this when he writes in the same work, "It is well enough for the masses of those called Masons to imagine that all is contained in the blue degrees, and those who attempt to deceive them will labour in vain. Masonry is the veritable sphinx buried in the sands, heaped around by the ages." However, even the sagas of the divine characters of Osiris, Isis and Horus, hoary as they are with age, harken back to the even earlier Assyrian Babylonian myths of Nimrod, Semiramis and Tammuz. Nimrod is also known in different traditions as Baal or Bel, Moloch, Horus, Mars, sun god and fire god. These myths are the template upon which all the secret orders are based their initiations and rituals. It is important to understand that the myths like these long predate the Egyptian civilizations and has been part of Western human psyche since known history began and beyond. Today the true meanings of these myths are revealed metaphorically, as been demonstrated in degrees within mystery schools. Nimrod was the son of Cush and Semiramis, and eventually became, like Horus, his mother-husband's lover. His uncle Shem, one of Noah's 3 sons, discovered the illicit union, killed Nimrod, cut up his body and hid the pieces throughout the kingdom. Semiramis hunted throughout the land for Nimrod's body parts and, having found them, magically put them together and made love to him. conceiving Tammuz. About midwinter, Semiramis declared Tammuz was Nimrod reincarnated. Midwinter, as we know, is the time the sun begins to return journey to the northern hemisphere from its most southerly sojourn, known as the winter solstice. Semiramis, introduced into Europe by the Druids, was but another name for Beltis or Ishtar of the Chaldeans and Babylonians. In other cultures she was known as Estre, Ostre, Ostera, Ashtoreth, Isis, Venus, Diana, the fertility goddess, the moon goddess, the queen of heaven, and so on. The roots of all religions are also found buried in these ancient myths and legends, recorded by a race we know little about, not even how their mind was organised. An advantage of knowing the foregoing is its confirmation for us that religion has always been a manipulation that suited the agenda of the contemporary parasitical elite. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. When the theory of the bicameral reactive mind is factored into the equation of history, it changes everything significantly. Initially, the ancient scribes who were compiling records of their recent history interpreted it according to what their god brain revealed to them. For instance, they might report on celestial upheavals and record them as supernatural events. However, the cognitive mind would interpret these same events as a shower of meteors streaming across the sky. Comet strikes on the earth are the source of most, if not all, myths and legends, and it has these events that had the biggest impact on ancient minds. However, when bicameral reports of these heavenly cataclysms are filtered through the introspective mind, the outcome is befuddled stories about wars between gods and so dismissed as myths, lacking real credibility. Simply put, the contemporary introspective mind interprets the records of the ancient bicameral civilizations according to its own modus operandi, thereby giving a total false paradigm of history. About 3,000 years ago, as the bicameral mind began to break down and the first of our kind discover individual consciousness, this is known as the proto-conscious stage, we find the first controllers, parasitical class, in the form of temple priests and usurper pharaohs, who laid the foundations for the modern system of dynastic houses, along with their quislings, who are found within religion, politics, academia, and a few other professions. Although people throughout history have had little success in opposing or even identifying them, they were finally exposed to the light when Dr. Wallace identified this camouflaged group of criminal-minded people who he branded neo-cheaters. Within this class of neo-cheaters is a master neo-cheater, whose power lies in keeping his identity and methodology secret. His system is so insidious, most people have trouble believing it could exist. How many of us would go along with their destructive schemes if we knew their true goals? Unfortunately, these goals cannot be fully explained. They can only be identified through individual discernment, study and research, and more research. You can be shown the door, but you have to open it yourself. Highly intelligent, indolent and dishonest humanoids invented foolproof ways of gaining riches and almost total power for themselves and their families. They invented houses and bloodlines to project their authority and protect their agenda. One of the many ways they accomplished this was through the manipulation of bicameral records to invent de facto histories, religions and party politics. Manipulating the historical legends of a great catastrophe allowed them to turn these records into the basis for supernatural religions whose leaders do not necessarily believe what they teach. Why should they believe something they know to be fictitious? In the early 16th century, Pope Leo X, for example, was reported to have said, "It has served us well, this myth of Christ." Thomas Paine, referring to the hierarchy within established religions, added, "Infidelity does not consist in believing or disbelieving. It consists in professing to believe what one does not believe." The controllers of the system do not want the populace to discover what Akhenaten had uncovered, that underpinning all manifestation there was only beautiful symmetry, one reality that has no beginning and no end, and therefore expunging the need for a creator god. There only ever were realms upon realms of creative existence, love, that manifests itself to maximum potential. Ayn Rand, in beautiful simplicity, wrote her famous axiom, "Existence exists," echoing an earlier maxim attributed to the mystery schools. There never was a beginning to being, and there never will be an end to being. Sadly, a dishonest elite manoeuvred the masses into a situation where they themselves could assume ultimate power and control, which they took full advantage of when they turned the celestial supra-beings into a pantheon of gods and put themselves forward as earthly representatives. These destructive concepts led in time to a myriad outside authorities, vying with other for power and control. Ultimately, they presented the one creator God to be obeyed and appeased on the pain of eternal damnation. The one God's religions are easily the greatest disaster ever to be inflicted on the human race, declared Gore Vidal. What Vidal calls the one God religions are in reality a garbled form of henotheism, where each of several divinities are regarded as independent and worshipped without reference to the rest, thereby acknowledging one God but accepting the possibility of the existence of others. This is far removed from the pure monotheism of Akhenaten. The maliciousness of de facto religion, missing in Akhenaten's philosophy, lies in the fact it not only attempts to control the individual while alive, but as Thomas Paine recognised, tyranny in religion is the worst. Every other species of tyranny is limited to the world we live in, but this attempts to stride beyond and seek to pursue us into eternity. To summarise, all supernatural religions are man-made and based on ancient myths. Religion does not proceed out of the mind of a supreme entity or one of its prophets. This is revealed in the truism that God is made in the image of man. Returning to our study of how ancient myth influenced the ritual at the Boyne, we will concentrate on the relatively more popular Egyptian form of the Nimrod Semiramis Tammuz story, which became the Osiris-Isis-Horus myth. For the purpose of our narrative, we only need to know the broad outline to clarify comparisons with the ritual battle. Osiris was the eldest of 4 offspring, born of an intrigue of the earth god Geb and the sky goddess Nut. When he was born, it is said, a voice rang out proclaiming that the Lord of all had come into the world. The other 3 siblings were Set, Seth, Isis, and Nephthys, which incidentally gave us the word Sion, Set, Isis, Osiris, Nephthys. Set married his sister Nephthys. Similarly, Osiris married his sister Isis. Osiris became the first king of Egypt, and the rule was beneficial to the Egyptians. He reclaimed the Egyptians before savagery, gave them laws, and taught them to worship the gods. Before this, Egyptians had been cannibals. Cannibal arises from the words Canaanite and their god Baal or Bel. Osiris leaves Isis to rule Egypt while he sets out to civilize the rest of mankind, perhaps a metaphor for the Phoenician Aryan race civilizing the world. Set, known as Typhon by the Greeks, god of chaos, is portrayed as the wicked brother of Osiris and the uncle of Horus. He is jealous of Osiris and wants to rule Egypt himself, and so, with other conspirators, he plots to overthrow Osiris. Set puts in plan into place by tricking Osiris into letting him have his body measurements. He then fashions an exquisitely decorated casket and arranges a celebration. Knowing Osiris would attend. While drinking and making merry at the banquet, Seth brings in the coffer and attempts Osiris into it by promising to give the valuable coffer to whoever it should fit precisely. Everyone at the party attempts to get into it, but of course it will only fit Osiris, who is the last to try. When he gets into the coffer, the conspirators rush to seal the airtight chest and throw it, with Osiris inside, into the Nile. When Isis heard of it, she sheared off the lock of her hair. She set out to look for him and finds his body in a city called Byblos. Hovering over the corpse of her husband in the form of a hawk, she immaculately conceives. She brings the coffer back to Egypt and hides it in the marshes of the Nile, but Set, or Seth, finds it, cuts up Osiris's body, and scatters it across the kingdom. Isis sets out to gain the pieces. She finally finds them all except the phallus, which was eaten by a fish, and puts them all together. With her sister Nephthys, they both grieve over the corpse. They wail a lament for Osiris that was to become the norm for Egyptian funeral rites. Come to thy house of the Lord, come to thy house, O Godon, come to thy house, thou who hast no foes. To demonstrate how universal the fundamental myth was, and show that it springs from a single source, there is reference in the Old Testament. And took me by a lock of mine head, then he brought me to the door of the gate of the Lord's house, which was towards the north, and behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. As the Osirian myth progresses, the sun god Ra hears Isis and Nephthys in their act of mourning, and taking pity on them, sends down the jackal-headed Anubis, known in Egyptian mythology as the carrier of the soul, who, with the aid of Isis, Nephthys, and Thoth pieced together the broken body of the murdered god. They swathed it in linen bandages and observed all the other rites which the Egyptians were wont to perform over the bodies of the departed. Osiris is brought back to life by magic spells cast by Isis. In the Matrix, Trinity also brings back Neo back to life, and, like Osiris, Neo's returned to consciousness in a different reality. After his resurrection, Osiris henceforth reigns as king and judge over the dead in the underworld, called by the Egyptians the Duat. This will give us better insight into the affirmation, Le roi est mort, vive le roi. The king is dead, long live the king. Osiris, by his resurrection, overcomes death and lives forever as a star, being in the constellation of Orion. From this time on, Osiris is associated with Orion, and both are to be found in the Duat on the other side of the winding waterway. This is where the souls of the departed make their journey and solemnly confess before Osiris in the Hall of the Two Truths. This confession, which predates the Ten Commandments, was known as the Confession to Mat. It is worth examining in full. Homage to thee, O great God, thou master of all truth. I have come to thee, O my God, and have brought myself hither, that I may become conscious of thy decrees. I know thee, and am attuned with thee and thy 42 laws, which exist with thee in the chamber of Mat. In truth, I have come into thine attunement, and I have brought Mat in my mind and soul. I have destroyed the wickedness for thee. I have not done evil to mankind. I have not wrought evil in the place of right and truth. I have no intimacy with worthless men. I have not demanded first consideration. I have not decreed that excessive labour should be performed for me. I have not brought forward my name for exaltation to honours. I have not defrauded the oppressed of property. I have made no man suffer hunger. I have made no one to weep. I have caused no pain to be inflicted upon man or animal. I have not defrauded the temples of their oblations. I have not diminished from the bushel. I have not encroached upon the fields of others. I have not filched away land. I have not added to the weights of the scales to cheat the seller. I have not misread the pointer of the scales to cheat the buyer. I have not kept the milk from the mouths of children. I have not turned back the water at time when it should flow. I have not extinguished the flame when it should burn. I have not repulsed God in his manifestations. I am pure, I am pure, I am pure. My purity is the purity of the divinity of the holy temple. Therefore, evil shall not befall me in this world, because I, even I, know the laws of God that are God. Crow Mat. Crow Mat roughly means, in truth let it be done, similar to Amen. Coincidentally, and as a point of interest, spelt backwards, it gives the initials of the present ancient and mystical order, Rosicrucis, Amorc. In the ceremony called the Weighing of the Heart, the petitioner's heart, represented their honesty and sincerity, is weighed against a feather representing truth, Mat. If balanced, the reward is eternal life, as a star existing in the duet with Osiris. Isis eventually gives birth to Horus, the son of Osiris, in the marshes of the Delta near Heliopolis, where she hides him. In mythology, marshes equates to darkness. William was also born in darkness, see below. We discover obvious similarities to the Moses Akhenaten story here. In due course, he grows into a powerful prince and challenges his uncle Seth for the sovereignty of Egypt. Horus takes his claim of kingship to the council of the gods and they grant him his request. Seth does not accept their verdict and is not about to give up without a fight, so they do battle on the banks of the Nile. Horus loses an eye during the clash. This is the eye that can be seen on the back of an American dollar bill. And Seth, Set, his testicles, probably the reason we say today he has no balls for the fight. The battle is inconclusive, as according to the most historians was the Boyne battle, but the sun god Ra sides with Horus and he becomes the first Horus king. Every pharaoh thereafter is said to be Horus reincarnated or a follower of Horus, and upon their death their body is taken across the Nile, Milky Way, to the Duat, where they are resurrected to rule with Osiris. The figure of Osiris is not exclusively at home in mythology. Each king at death becomes Osiris, just as each king in life appears on the throne of Horus. Each king is Horus. The question whether Osiris and Horus are gods or kings is for the Egyptian meaningless. These gods are the late king and the successor, these kings are those gods. Henry Frankfurt, Kinship and the Gods, 1948. It must be understood that these myths are composed in such a way as to be understood on many levels. Bovall and Hancock, in their best-selling book, Keeper of Genesis, referred to earlier, confirmed the idea that the Nile found its heavenly counterpart in the Milky Way. See illustration that demonstrates the Boyne as a more accurate reflection of the Milky Way. One of the most salient features of the Duat, as it is described in the ancient Egyptian texts, is its relationship to a great cosmic river called the Winding Waterway. Several studies have confirmed beyond any serious doubt that the Winding Waterway was the magical band of light meandering across the sky that we know as the Milky Way. It is also evident that the ancient priest astronomers who compiled the pyramid texts identified the terrestrial counterpart of this winding waterway in the sky as the River Nile. The stars of Orion and Sirius are located on the right bank of the Milky Way, which at the summer solstice in the Pyramid Age would have appeared as a vertical cosmic river in the pre-dawn in the east. Continuing to quote from the pyramid text, they write, "Be firm, O Osiris King, on the underside of the sky with the beautiful star Sirius upon the bend of the winding waterway. Betake yourself to the waterway. May the stairway to the Duat be set for you to the place where Orion is. O King, you are this great star, the companion of Orion, who traverses the sky with Orion, who navigates in the Duat with Osiris." They also mention, when referring to the ancient Egyptian myths, what they had in mind, in other words, was a kind of cosmic passion play, expressed in the language of allegorical astronomy, in which each main character was identified with a specific celestial body. Re was associated with the sun, Osiris with Orion, Isis with the star Sirius, and Thoth the moon, and so forth. Nor was the drama only confined to the celestial realms. On the contrary, as one might expect in the dualism of ancient Egypt, it was reenacted on the ground, and later, the great journeys of Horus thus took place both in the sky and on the ground, and ran, as it were, in parallel. The final pieces of the puzzle are now falling into place to show more clearly how the myths and legends of ancient Egypt relate directly to the historic ritual at the Boyne. Before moving on, however, it is necessary to slot in some more of the puzzle pieces concerning William, beginning in his birth chamber. William III was born on November the 4th, 1650, about 2 weeks after his father. William II died, which makes him son of the widow, a significant Templar Masonic term. This concept runs through all esoteric literature, according to the occultist Max Heindel, from as far back as the story of Eve. Parsifal, for example, a knight of the Grail quest, was son of the widow. Actual significant figures in history who were widows' sons include Hiram Abiff, Isaac Newton, and the Prophet Muhammad. In the Mark Mason degree of the Masonic Order, the initiates sing a song called, oddly enough, the Mark Mason Song. The first verse refers to Hiram being a widow's son. Hiram, the widow's son, sent to King Solomon the great keystone. On it appears the name which raises the fame of all to whom the same is truly known. So this is Isis with child Horus and widow and son. This little statue on the left here. Both Horus and Tammuz, the reincarnated Nimrod, could also have been born the epitaph son of the widow. You might consider that William being the son of a widow is not particularly significant, since many sons have been born after their fathers had died. However, when all the other so-called coincidences are taken into account, then a more coherent story emerges. The bedroom in which William made his entrance into this world was draped in black. The accepted reason for this was that his mother was in mourning for her husband. It is normal, however, for a Masonic lodge room to be decked in black during initiations. For example, the Secret Master is the 4th degree in the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, the first of what is called the ineffable degrees, and coincidentally the lodge is hung with black curtains strewed with tears, symbolic of grief. Solomon is seated in the east, clothed in mourning robes. This degree implies the Masonic concept of emerging from darkness into light, as happens when one is born, or in the case of the Masonic initiated, reborn. Upon his arrival in the Boyne Valley, William proceeds to the bank of the river with his senior officers, initiators. He receives a wound to his right shoulder and later another to his lower leg. These wounds are received by candidates seeking admission into certain initiatory orders, example the Orange Order. For instance, in the early 18th century there were various Orange societies, of which the more significant of these was called the Royal Boyne Society, probably originated in Dublin. Other Orange societies were founded in a town called Brandon in County Cork. It is thought it may have initially been confined to the gentry and military officers who served with William before spreading throughout Ireland. The interesting paragraph in the article for us as follows. One of the most obvious influences of the Boyne Society on modern day Orangism is the degree system. The first degree is referred to as the Boyne men. The second degree was referred to as the Knights of the Glorious Order of the Boyne and was confined to a much smaller number of people. Like the orange and black institutions, they also used Masonic signs and passwords. The signs used by the Boyne men were apparently based around a wound received by King William at the Boyne. After William had been shot in the shoulder, the officers nearest thought him dead, which, metaphorically, he was if viewed from the perspective of an occult initiation. In the Masonic order, as well as the Orange, the initiate dies and is reborn into a different reality. William then retires to a hollow in the ground, grave, to have his wound dressed. He snaps at his officers. "What is wrong? Why don't you move on?" A strange thing to say to people tending his wounds. Did they think him seriously because they were not privy to the occult aspects of his wounds? According to Hancock and Boval, the Horus King stands on the east bank of the Nile. William stood on the northeast bank of the Boyne. After completing certain rituals, as William did, he boards the great solar boat. Our star map shows the sun, Horus, William, in the great solar boat, and is taken to the west bank of the river. The idea of William being a son of a widow needs little more explaining. The epithet also almost certainly indicates William was a member of the initiatory orders, because initiates are known to each other as brothers, meaning they are all methodically sons of the same mother or sons of the widow. The widow is the lodge and the members its sons. Mother and sons translates as masons, reflecting the many paintings and statues of the beautiful Madonna and Child. There is, significantly, a statue of the Madonna and Child prominently positioned above the entrance to the sanctuary in Roslin, the Knights Templar Chapel. This is erroneously believed to be the only Christian icon in this church. It is probable that William was associated with the Rosicrucian movement. His mentor and physician was one John Frederick Helvetius, an alchemist and Rosicrucian. It isn't necessary to revisit James's occult history, as it is recognised that the Stuart family, through James I, brought an offshoot of the mystery schools to England in 1603 that become the basis for the Masonic orders. It has also been pointed out this family always had connections with esoteric orders. Supporting this theory is a text of an article that appeared in December 2002 edition of the Rosicrucian Beacon, a quarterly magazine, stating that the Rosicrucian Michael Mayer sent James I a Christmas greeting in 1612. In this historical document, he praised James as a protector and promoter of the Rosicrucians. "Long live James, King of Great Britain! Hail! May the rose be joyful under thy protection." When William dies, contextual to the Osiris ritual, his next step is to prepare for the journey across the Boyne River, winding waterway to the underworld, the Duat, place of the dead or darkness. Douth, the most northerly monument, the north in the Masonic terms is a place of darkness. In Irish is Dubad, or Dubá. Sounds like Duat. This translates as a place of darkness. Briefly, mythology relates that an Irish king, Breslal Bo Dubad, tried to build a tower to heaven, Tower of Nimrod, but the men of Ireland can only give him 1 day's labour. His sister, a witch, stopped the sun to allow him to complete his task. He later rapes her in a fit of pique. She cancels her spell, the sun continues its journey and the day becomes night, dub, black or dark, and the tower remained unfinished, and so the place becomes known as Dubad, meaning darkness. Corresponding to the above, Dunmore Church, where James was ensconced, includes a very old graveyard. This is where James, metaphorically, awaits William to invest him as Horus King, legitimising his claim to the Stuart throne, to rule with his wife Mary and continue the Stuart bloodline, but not the Stuart house. The underworld, the Duat, is guarded by the dog-like jackal-headed Anubis, the opener of the way. In ancient Egypt, the hottest days of the summer were known as the dog days and related to the rising of the dog star Sirius and that most important event, the inundation of the Nile. It was, significantly, the moment when the gods are born, i.e. the exact time of the rising of the star Sirius. On the 1st of July 1690, at 8 o'clock in the morning, the Boyne River was in flood and Sirius was sitting on the horizon. See star map on page 251. William had arose at 4 as the sun came over the Horus Eisen and placed himself on the bank of the river as the sun was positioning himself on the bank of the winding waterway. Examining our star map, again we notice the sun is in the middle of what geographically looks like a bark. This is the constellation of Gemini, the twins. A theory turned up in my research proposing that, because the first letter of William's name is made of two V's, it is indicative of his name being in relationship to twins. Many connotations can be applied to William's name. For instance, the letter is W and the last M being its reverse image, in fact twins. Within the name we find Illy, once again twins. Finally, the A is a Baconian secret signature. William Henry associates William with the word Elohim, Eliam, the plural of El, the mighty one, and speculates it's the mysterious root of such words as Illuminati. Joe Downey says that this whole area is replete with legends about twins. The name M1 itself means twins, and as we established, the sun was in Gemini on the first day of July 1690. The symbolism of twins also echoes the ancient Egyptian and later Gnostic teachings of duality, which means everything in the manifested universe must have its opposite. There is also our earlier central proposal of twin comets striking the Earth. Right, people, I think I'll leave it there. I'll make that part 1 of this chapter, and I'll see you in the second part of this chapter, which is pretty interesting, I've got to say. Like, I think to myself, what's he going to say this time? And as I'm reading, I'm like, he's got a point there. He's got a point there. So I'm still interested. It's still good stuff. Anyway, I will see you in part 2. Have a good weekend, people.